First, I want to echo what my fellow contributors have said here about being honored to be included in this volume. And I'm also an add-on like Peter, and I think that's largely attributable to Anthony sort of recruiting me and encouraging me, and I appreciate that, and I thank you for that, Anthony. I just got to see the full book a couple of days ago, and it's a really impressive volume. I'm genuinely honored to be in it. And what's interesting is that, as Peter said, our academic colleagues at institutions are not likely to recognize this as something that was worth doing on our part, a worthwhile allocation of our professional time. And in political science, we have this sort of bizarre situation where the science part of political science is almost completely eclipsed the politics part, so we're not supposed to write or speak in ways that are actually explicitly political. That's a pretty perverse situation. And it's a joy to be able to write something that's explicitly political, so thanks, Anthony, for that opportunity. I guess the main thing I want to share with you is that I've become increasingly aware of a variety of forces impinging on the ability of people in the academy to write things that are critical of global power relationships, of U.S. foreign policy in particular, and the sort of power structures of empire that we live in. And I would say that it's important to recognize that these forces are not entirely new. Academic repression has been with us for a long time, but they've really taken on renewed impetus since 9/11. And that the sense of threat and fear that has been is understandable maybe in some parts of the American public, that has been exploited and pumped up and turned to pressures for conformism and to support the troops and to be either with us or with the terrorists. And those things have been turned back against what I would like to think of as the possibilities of free inquiry and discussion in the academy. So the people who are critical of U.S. foreign policy or are critical of, let's say, Israeli policies in Palestine can be singled out as being sympathizers of terrorism and pro-terrorism. There are groups out there who are actively dedicated to doing that, who get funding from right-wing groups, and who are out to really intimidate and silence academics. And I don't pretend to be, there are people in this book who are genuinely sort of political, intellectual martyrs, and I'm certainly not in that category. But let me just share a story with you about a friend of mine who actually is in the sociology department at UC Santa Barbara, so I was delighted to hear that your friend wound up there. His name's Bill Robinson, and Bill is a globally famous scholar of globalization, and he is genuinely internationally known. He's a really good guy. He spent 10 years writing for Barcata as a Sandinista before he got his PhD. He's from Brooklyn. He's a Jewish guy from Brooklyn who became a Sandinista for a decade and then got a PhD, and now he's teaching at UC Santa Barbara. He's a fascinating dude and really interesting to listen to. And Bill forwarded to his class an email from a political list that he subscribes to that compared, in a sort of thought-provoking way, the plight of Palestinians in Gaza to the plight of Jews in the Warsaw Ghetto. And some students in his class took offense at this. This small group of students belong to a group called Stand With Us, which has a great deal of funding, it has a presence on many campuses around the country, including SU. And their mission is to explicitly promote pro-Israel views and counter any criticism of Israel in the classroom. And so Bill was immediately reported by them to the Anti-Defamation League. The president of the Anti-Defamation League came and had meetings with the administration of UC Santa Barbara, and Bill was accused of anti-Semitism and professional misconduct, and was in the process of being investigated by the university for those things when faculty and student protests basically brought a halt to that, and the faculty senate at UC Santa Barbara, much to their credit, violation of, for sort of standard procedures for investigating these kinds of claims, and for sort of railroading Bill, and ultimately rejected the charges and insisted that the administrative officers who railroaded this investigation should themselves be investigated. So there's a happy ending to the story, but my point is that there's all kinds of organizations out there who are very well funded, who are looking to intimidate and suppress and silence critical voices, and it's really important, I think, that we keep those critical voices in a safe place in the academy, because for one thing, the progress of knowledge depends upon it, and for another thing, the health of our democracy and our sort of vigorous public life, I think, depends on it. So I'm glad things worked out for Bill, but you know, there's fight goes on. There's a lot of groups out there who are going to continue to push these kinds of things on us. The American Council of Trustees and Alumni is one. You may have heard of David Horowitz, who publishes these books vilifying professors. I'm sorry to say I didn't make it into any of the books, but I do have a little section on David Horowitz's website, so you know, I'll sell for that, I guess. I think that we are, in a sense, besieged. And my story has to do with sort of stumbling into an element of that where the Academy had been targeted by the Pentagon for pro-war propaganda operations. And by stumbling into that, I learned how extensive Pentagon propaganda efforts are at home. And I started thinking about that and relating that to some of my childhood experiences as an Army brat growing up on Army bases. And my essay kind of grew out of that. But I think, you know, I don't want to talk so much about my story. I think the main point I want to leave you with is the idea that the Academy is a contested space. Maybe I'm a little more optimistic about academic freedom than Anthony is. I do believe it exists, although it's contested and needs to be vigorously defended. And that's why I think this is such an important book.